My name is Natasha Martinez. I'm 68 years old. And that day, that beautiful, sunlit Saturday in May, was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life. Instead, it became the day I learned that sometimes the people you sacrifice everything for can wound you deeper than any stranger ever could. Let me take you back to that moment. Picture it with me. A university auditorium packed with over 800 guests. Parents in their finest clothes, cameras flashing, proud smiles everywhere you looked. The stage was decorated with white roses and royal blue banners. My daughter, Ella, stood at that podium in her black graduation gown, the gold valedictorian cord draped around her shoulders, looking every bit like the success story everyone said she was. And me? I sat in the fourth row, wearing the only good dress I owned, the navy one I'd bought from a thrift store 3 years ago, my hands folded carefully in my lap, hidden beneath my cream-colored shawl. I remember every single word she said that day. Every single word. They're burned into my memory like a brand of cattle, permanent and painful. I want to thank my professors, she began, her voice clear and confident through the microphone. I want to thank my friends who became my family. I want to thank the scholarship committee that believed in me. I want to thank my roommates who kept me sane during finals week. The crowd laughed. She smiled that bright, camera-ready smile. And you know, she continued, pausing for effect, growing up, I always told myself I wanted hands softer than my mother's. More laughter. Loud laughter. The kind that ripples through a crowd like a wave, building momentum as it goes. I heard people chuckling around me. I saw heads nodding in the rows ahead. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh my God, that's so relatable." But she wasn't done. I wanted hands that would never be rough, never be calloused, never be stained with the kind of work that leaves marks you can't wash away. And today, I can finally say, I made it. The applause was thunderous. 800 people clapped for my daughter's achievement. 800 people celebrated her success. 800 people laughed at what those rough, calloused, stained hands had built. Do you know what calloused hands mean? Do you know what they represent? They're not a fashion statement. They're not a lifestyle choice. They're surviving. They're evidence of a life spent doing whatever it takes to keep food on the table, a roof overhead, and hope alive in your child's heart. My hands. My God, my hands. These hands that she was so ashamed of, so desperate to distance herself from, so eager to use as a punchline for 800 strangers. Let me tell you about these hands. These hands started working when I was 14 years old, helping my mother sew dresses for the neighborhood women. These hands learned to thread a needle in the dark because we couldn't always afford to keep the lights on late. These hands developed their first calluses at 16, working double shifts at Rivera's textile factory on the east side of town. These hands held my husband Carlos on the night he died, feeling his heartbeat slow beneath my palm while I whispered prayers I wasn't sure anyone was listening to. These hands were 29 years old when they became the only hands Ella had left. Carlos died on a Tuesday. A regular, unremarkable Tuesday in October. He was a good man, my Carlos. A construction worker with dreams bigger than his paycheck, a smile that could light up a room, and a heart that broke when he couldn't give Ella the fancy toys she saw in store windows. He worked himself to exhaustion building houses for people who would never know his name. And on that Tuesday, a scaffolding collapse took him from us in an instant. The funeral was small. We couldn't afford anything grand. I remember standing at his grave with 5-year-old Ella clinging to my leg, looking at the simple wooden cross that marked where they laid him to rest, and thinking, how do I do this alone? But these hands, these rough, calloused, embarrassing hands, they figured it out. These hands went back to the factory 3 days after the funeral because the bills don't pause for grief. These hands learned to work even faster on the industrial sewing machines, stitching sleeve after sleeve, hem after hem, seam after seam until my fingers cramped and my shoulders ached and my eyes blurred from the fluorescent lights. These hands took on overtime shifts every single week for 13 years straight. Every single week. These hands sewed wedding dresses for brides who would wear them once. These hands stitched suits for businessmen who would never think twice about the woman who made sure their lapels lay flat. These hands hemmed pants for teenagers who would complain they weren't trendy enough. These hands created beauty for other people while my own clothes grew threadbare and faded. And for what? For Ella. Everything was always for Ella. These hands packed her lunches every morning before the sun came up. These hands braided her hair before school, gentle despite the calluses. These hands washed her clothes by hand when the washing machine broke and I couldn't afford to fix it for 8 months. These hands held her when she cried about not having the same sneakers as the popular girls. These hands applauded at every school play, every science fair, every piano recital I could make it to after my shift ended. These hands bled sometimes. Yes, bled. When you work with industrial sewing machines 10 hours a day, accidents happen. Needles slip. Fingers get caught. I've sewn through my own skin more times than I care to count. I still have the scars. Small white lines across my index fingers, my thumbs, the heel of my left hand. Battle scars from a war I fought to give my daughter a better life than mine. These hands never stopped moving. Even at home, I took in alterations work. Neighbors would bring me clothes to fix, and I'd sit at my old Singer machine, the one Carlos bought me as a wedding gift 43 years ago, and I'd sew late into the night while Ella did her homework at the kitchen table. $5 for a dress. $10 to take in a jacket. $15 to add a zipper. Every dollar counted. Every single one. These hands knew the weight of choosing between buying Ella new shoes for school or paying the electric bill in full. These hands knew what it felt like to count pennies at the grocery store checkout line while people in line behind me sighed impatiently. These hands knew the humiliation of using food stamps while Ella pretended not to notice the cashier's judgmental stare. But these hands never let Ella go without. Never. If she needed something for school, these hands worked extra hours to get it. If she wanted to go on the class trip, these hands took on more alterations work. If she needed a laptop for college applications, these hands bled for 6 months straight to save enough money. When Ella got accepted to university, her dream school, the one she'd talked about since she was 12 years old, do you know what I did? I cried. Not pretty, delicate tears. I sobbed. I fell to my knees in our tiny living room and thanked God and Carlos and anyone who might be listening because my baby, my Ella, was going to have opportunities one never had. She was going to escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped my mother, and her mother, and me. The tuition was crushing. Even with scholarships, there were so many expenses. Housing. Books. Meal plans. Technology fees. Activity fees. Health insurance. The numbers made my head spin. But these hands, these rough hands that would later become her punchline, these hands worked miracles. I took on a second job cleaning offices at night. Monday through Friday, I'd finish my shift at the factory at 6 p.m., go home and eat whatever I could heat up quickly, then head to the downtown business district to clean from 8 p.m. to midnight. 4 hours of emptying trash bins, vacuuming floors, scrubbing toilets, wiping down desks for people who left coffee stains and crumbs and never thought about who cleaned up after them. My hands aged 10 years in those 4 years of Ella's university education. The calluses grew thicker. The joints started to ache in the morning. The skin became so dry it would crack and bleed in winter. I tried every lotion, every cream, every remedy anyone suggested, but nothing could undo the damage of 16-hour workdays, 6 days a week, for years on end. I never complained. Not once. Not to Ella, not to anyone. Because the point wasn't comfort. The point was her future. The point was making sure she never had to work the way I worked. The point was giving her soft hands, educated hands, hands that would hold a diploma instead of a factory time card. And I was so close. So close to seeing it all pay off. The graduation day started beautifully. I woke up at 5 a.m. like always. My body can't sleep past that time anymore, trained by decades of early factory shifts. I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table in our small apartment, the one I'd lived in for 37 years, and I looked at my hands wrapped around that mug. I remember thinking, these hands did it. These hands got her across the finish line. I felt proud. Genuinely, deeply proud. Not of myself, I've never been good at being proud of myself, but proud of what these hands represented. Sacrifice. Endurance. A mother's love is made tangible through work. I'd bought a new shawl for the occasion. Cream-colored, soft, pretty. It cost more than I usually spend on myself, but I thought, just this once, for this special day, I could splurge. And I'll be honest with you, I bought it partly to cover my hands. I knew they didn't look like the other mother's hands. I knew they told a story Ella didn't always want people to know. She'd started becoming ashamed of our life somewhere around her sophomore year of university. The signs were subtle at first. She stopped inviting friends to visit our apartment. She started saying she was from the Riverside area instead of naming our specific neighborhood. She cropped me out of photos she'd posted online, or if I was in them, she'd make sure my hands weren't visible. One time, during her junior year, I visited her on campus to bring her some homemade food, her favorite chicken stew that I'd stayed up late making. She met me at the campus gate instead of her dorm room. She took the container quickly, glanced around nervously, and said, "Thanks, Mom. I should get back to studying." I asked if I could see her room, maybe meet her roommates. She said they were all busy. I asked if we could have coffee together at the campus cafe. She said she had a group project meeting in 20 minutes. I asked if everything was okay. She said everything was fine, she was just stressed about exams. But I saw it in her eyes. That flicker of embarrassment. That desperate wish that I would leave before someone she knew saw us together. It broke something in me that day. Not completely, the love of a mother doesn't break that easily, but a crack formed. A small fissure in my heart that would grow wider over time. Still, I told myself it was normal. She was young, finding herself, building a new identity. She'd come back around. She'd remember where she came from. She'd appreciate the sacrifices once she was older and had perspective. I was wrong. Sitting in that auditorium on graduation day, wearing my thrift store dress and my new shawl, watching my daughter at that podium, I felt that crack split wide open. I wanted hands softer than my mother's. The laughter continued. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes, they thought it was so funny. So clever. So relatable. I sat there, perfectly still, my rough hands hidden under my cream-colored shawl, and I felt something shift inside me. It didn't hurt. It wasn't just betrayal. It was something colder, something harder, something that settled into my bones like frost. Dignity. That's what clicked into place. A fierce, protective dignity that said, I will not cry here. I will not give these people my pain as entertainment. So I didn't react. I didn't stand up and leave. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, memorizing everything. The sound of the laughter. The faces of the people around me who thought my life's work was joke material. The way Ella smiled so proudly after delivering her punchline. The flash of cameras capturing this memorable moment. I memorized it all. Because I knew, even then, that time has a way of teaching lessons that mothers can't. After the ceremony, there was a reception on the lawn. Tables with white tablecloths, finger foods, punch in clear plastic cups. Families clustered together taking photos. I stood near the edge, watching Ella pose with her friends, their arms around each other, their young faces glowing with achievement and possibility. She saw me eventually. Our eyes met across the lawn. For a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, I saw something like regret cross her face. But then one of her friends called her name, and she turned away, and the moment was gone. I left before she could come over. I couldn't bear the false cheerfulness, the introduction to her friends that would be accompanied by nervous laughter and quick explanations. I couldn't bear being reduced to a footnote in her new narrative. I took the bus home alone. The same bus I'd taken thousands of times before. I sat in my usual seat near the back and looked at my hands resting in my lap. These hands that had built her whole world. These hands that had sacrificed comfort, health, beauty, everything, for her future. These hands that had just been publicly mocked by the person they'd worked hardest to protect. When I got home, I went straight to my bedroom. I opened the old wooden chest at the foot of my bed, the chest Carlos had made for me during the first year of our marriage. Inside were all the letters he'd written me when he was away doing construction jobs in other cities. Inside were the receipts from every major purchase we'd made for Ella. Inside was the hospital bill from her birth. Inside was her first drawing, her first report card, her first handwritten "I love you mama" note. I pulled out Carlos's old letterbox, the one he used to write his thoughts in before bed. After he died, I'd continued the tradition. Whenever life felt overwhelming, I'd write in that book, imagining I was talking to him. That night, I wrote, "Carlos, our baby graduated today. She looked so beautiful up there. So confident. So successful. Everything we dreamed of for her. But she's ashamed of us, mi amor. She's ashamed of what it took to get her there." She made a joke about my hands in front of hundreds of people. They all laughed. "Maybe you're lucky you didn't have to see it. Or maybe you would have known better than me how to make her understand." I don't know what to do. Do I confront her? Do I let it go? Do I keep sacrificing for someone who sees my sacrifice as something to escape from? I'm so tired, Carlos. My hands hurt. My heart hurts. Tell me what to do. But Carlos couldn't answer. The dead never can, no matter how much we wish they would. I made a decision that night, sitting in the dark with that letterbox in my lap. I decided that I wouldn't justify myself. I wouldn't beg for recognition or appreciation. I wouldn't explain to Ella what those hands had done, because if she didn't already know, then words wouldn't teach her. I would simply note. I would observe. I would wait. Time, I told myself, would do the talking. The next few weeks passed in a strange fog. Ella moved her things out of her dorm and into a storage unit because she'd accepted a job in New York City. New York City. My daughter, who grew up in a tiny apartment in a working-class neighborhood, was moving to Manhattan to work in public relations for a marketing firm. She was excited. Nervous. Full of plans and dreams. She talked about the apartment she'd share with 3 roommates in Brooklyn. She talked about the subway system she'd have to learn. She talked about the clients she'd work with, the campaigns she'd help create, the career trajectory she was planning. I listened. I smiled. I helped her pack. But there was a distance between us now, a careful politeness that replaced our old warmth. She never apologized for the graduation speech. Never brought it up. Maybe she didn't even realize it had hurt me. Maybe in her mind, it was just a funny anecdote, a clever way to articulate her ambitions. Maybe she'd already rewritten our history in her head, casting herself as the protagonist who escaped difficult circumstances rather than the daughter whose circumstances were made bearable by someone else's suffering. People do that, you know. Rewrite their own stories. Edit out the uncomfortable parts. Smooth over the rough edges. Create a narrative they can live with. Before she left for New York, I gave her a small gift. A silver thimble, an antique one that had belonged to my grandmother, passed down to my mother, then to me. It was beautiful, engraved with tiny flowers around the rim. For good luck, I told her, pressing it into her palm. A reminder of where you come from. She looked at it, confused. Mom, I don't sew. I know, I said. But maybe someday you'll understand why I'm giving it to you. She tucked it into her purse with a distracted smile and promised to call when she got settled in New York. She called twice in the first month. Once to tell me she'd arrived safely. Once to tell me the job was overwhelming but exciting. Then the calls became more sporadic. Once every 2 weeks. Then once a month. Then only on my birthday and major holidays. I didn't chase her. I didn't blame her. I went back to my routine, factory during the day, cleaning offices at night, coming home to an apartment that felt too quiet now that she was gone. My hands kept working. That's what they knew how to do. Work and endure. 3 months after Ella moved to New York, on a Wednesday morning in late August, I received a certified letter. The return address was from a law office in Portland, Maine, a place I'd never been, from people I'd never met. I almost didn't open it. Legal letters usually mean trouble, debt collectors, eviction notices, bills you can't pay. But something made me slice open that envelope at my kitchen table with the same paring knife I used to cut vegetables. Inside was a letter from an attorney named Richard Morrison, Esquire. The letter informed me that my aunt, my father's sister, Lucia Reyes, had passed away at the age of 92. And in her will, she had named me as the sole heir to her estate. I had to read that sentence 3 times before it made any sense. Aunt Lucia. I barely remembered her. She'd left our family when I was a child, some kind of argument with my father that was never discussed in detail. I knew she'd moved to Maine. I knew she'd done something in textiles. But we'd never had contact. I'd always assumed she'd forgotten about us entirely. According to the letter, Aunt Lucia had never married, never had children. She'd spent her life building a textile manufacturing business, starting small and eventually owning a factory that produced high-quality fabrics for designers and clothing manufacturers up and down the East Coast. And now, somehow, impossibly, her estate, including the factory, her home, her savings, and various investments, was mine. The total estimated value, $8.7 million. $8.7 million. I sat at that table for 2 hours, just staring at that number. It didn't feel real. Numbers that large don't feel real when you've spent your entire life counting pennies, when you've made decisions based on whether you can afford the generic brand or have to skip a meal, when you've worn shoes until they literally fell apart because new ones weren't in the budget. $8.7 million. These hands. These rough, calloused, mocked hands. These hands that Ella was so ashamed of. These hands that represented everything she wanted to escape from. These hands had just inherited a fortune made from fabric and thread. The irony was so sharp it cut. It actually made me laugh, a short, bitter sound in my empty kitchen. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. But I didn't call Ella to tell her. I didn't call anyone. I sat with that letter, and I thought about Carlos. I thought about the life we'd planned together, the dreams we'd had, the future we'd thought we'd share. I thought about him dying young, never seeing his daughter graduate, never knowing she'd be ashamed of the life he'd worked himself to death to provide. And I thought about what I wanted to do with this impossible, unexpected gift. I could have retired immediately. I could have quit both jobs, bought a comfortable house, traveled, lived in ease for the first time in my life. God knows I'd earned it. But that's not what these hands were meant to do. These hands weren't meant for leisure. They were meant for building. So I started planning. Over the next several weeks, I worked with attorney Morrison to settle the estate. The factory in Maine was still operational but struggling. It needed modernization, updated equipment, better management. Aunt Lucia had been too old in her final years to keep up with industry changes. I decided to renovate it. More than that, I decided to transform it. I named it the Stitch of Hope Foundation. It would continue producing textiles, but the profits would fund scholarships for daughters of single mothers who worked manual labor jobs. Girls whose mothers had rough hands like mine. Girls who might otherwise never afford university. Girls who needed someone to believe in them the way I'd believed in Ella. I kept working at my factory job and my cleaning job while setting this up. Not because I needed the money anymore, but because I needed the time to think, to plan, to make sure I did this right. I didn't tell Ella about any of it. She called me on my birthday in September. "Hi, Mom. Happy birthday. Sorry I can't be there. Work is crazy. How are you?" "I'm fine, Mija. How's New York?" "Exhausting but amazing. I'm working on this huge campaign for a luxury watch brand. If it goes well, I might get promoted." "That's wonderful, Ella. How's the factory?" "Still stitching away?" "Still stitching away." Like it was a quaint hobby instead of the labor that had funded her existence. "Still stitching," I confirmed. We talked for 7 more minutes. Surface level updates. Weather. Her roommate drama. My neighbor's new cat. Then she had to go, client dinner. I hung up and looked at my hands. Soon, these hands would do more than stitch. They would build something that would outlast both of us. Meanwhile, in New York, Ella was building a different kind of life. She'd started using E. Martinez professionally, taking her father's last name Martinez instead of Martinez because it sounded more international, she'd told me once. She posted photos online from rooftop parties and art gallery openings. She wore designer clothes I recognized from magazine ads. She looked happy and successful and completely disconnected from the girl who used to do homework at our kitchen table while I sewed late into the night. I didn't begrudge her success. I'd wanted her to succeed. That was the whole point. But I noticed she never posted photos of our apartment. Never mentioned where she came from. Never talked about her mother. It was like she'd built her new identity by erasing the foundation it stood on. In December, about 8 months after graduation, I attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony at the newly renovated factory in Portland, Maine. It was a small event, local press, some business leaders, the scholarship recipients who would be the first to benefit from the foundation. Standing inside that factory, looking at the updated equipment, the bright workspace, the photos on the wall of the women and daughters we'd be helping, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not the desperate, survival-driven purpose of keeping a child alive, but the real purpose. Legacy-building purpose. One of the scholarship recipients, a 17-year-old girl named Maria whose mother worked in a laundromat, came up to me after the ceremony. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, her eyes shining, "thank you. My mom has been working 70 hours a week to try to save for my college. Now she won't have to kill herself for me to have a future. Thank you." I took her hands in mine, her young, smooth hands that didn't yet know the weight of impossible choices. "Your mother's hands are beautiful," I told her. "Remember that. Whatever work they do, they're beautiful because they're building your future." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. In January, almost a year after graduation, Ella called me in tears. "Mom, something happened." My heart jumped. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Physically. But Mom, they're downsizing at work. I got laid off." "Oh, Mija. I'm so sorry." "It's not just that. My rent is so expensive here. My roommates are all keeping their jobs so they can stay, but I can't afford my share without income. I've been applying everywhere but nothing yet. And I have student loans starting soon and credit card debt and... She was spiraling. I let her finish. I don't know what to do, she finally said, her voice small. There was a long pause. Then she asked, Mom, can you help me? Just temporarily. Just until I get another job. Maybe enough to cover rent for a couple months. I looked at my hands, resting on my kitchen table. The same hands I was looking at almost a year ago when she publicly mocked them. Ella, I said softly, ask the woman you became. Not the one you left behind. Silence. What? You built a life that was about having soft hands, remember? You built an identity that was separate from your rough-handed mother. So ask that woman for help. Ask E. Martinez, the public relations professional who works on luxury campaigns. Don't ask Natasha Martinez, the factory worker with embarrassing hands. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? More silence. I was proud of you, I continued, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. I was so proud. But you were ashamed of me. Ashamed of what it took to get you there. So now you figure out what soft hands can build for you. I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I paced my small apartment, arguing with myself, doubting myself, wondering if I was being cruel, wondering if this was the right way to teach a lesson, wondering if maybe I should just send her the money and let her learn nothing. But these hands knew something about tough love. These hands knew that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone feel the full weight of their choices. Ella called back the next day. I didn't answer. She called again 3 days later. I didn't answer. She sent texts, Mom, I'm sorry. Can we please talk? I responded once, I love you. But I'm not your emergency fund for a life that pretends I don't exist. February came. March. I kept working, kept managing the foundation, kept living my simple life. And then, in early April, I got an interesting phone call from Attorney Morrison. Natasha, he said, the foundation is getting significant press attention. The Portland mayor wants to do a feature story about the scholarship program. And they're planning a gala fundraiser to expand the program to other states. They want to honor the founder, they want to honor you. Me? Yes. It'll be in late May. Black tie event. Press coverage. Influential donors. This could help the foundation reach so many more families. I thought about it. A public event. Recognition. My name and face in the news. Ella would find out. I'll do it, I said. The gala was scheduled for May 18th at the Portland Performing Arts Center. It would be elegant, well-attended, meaningful. And I made sure that part of the event planning included hiring a communications consultant to help with press materials. I specifically requested they reach out to someone from New York with PR experience. I gave them a list of firms to contact, including the one where Ella had worked before being laid off. By some coincidence, or perhaps by the universe's continued sense of irony, Ella, now freelancing desperately to pay her bills, accepted the contract. She had no idea who the foundation's founder was. The initial materials just said anonymous donor and local benefactor. She flew to Portland 2 weeks before the gala to work on the communication strategy. I watched from a distance as she toured the factory, interviewed scholarship recipients, drafted press releases, created social media content. She was good at her job. Professional, creative, thorough. Watching her work, I felt that old pride flicker back to life. She had built real skills. She did have talent. But she'd built it all while pretending she'd sprung from nowhere. May 18th arrived. The gala was beautiful, the kind of event I'd never imagined being part of. Hundreds of people in evening gowns and tuxedos, champagne flowing, live music, flowers everywhere. I wore a dress I'd made myself, burgundy silk, elegant and simple, with long sleeves that covered my arms. But I didn't cover my hands. Not tonight. Ella was there in the crowd, looking polished and professional, still not knowing what was about to happen. The mayor gave opening remarks. A scholarship recipient gave a tearful thank you speech. The foundation director talked about our expansion plans. Then the mayor returned to the microphone. And now, he said, it's my honor to introduce the woman who made all of this possible. The woman whose vision and generosity rebuilt this factory and created opportunities for hundreds of families. Please welcome the founder of the Stitch of Hope Foundation, Mrs. Natasha Martinez. The spotlight swung to where I stood at the side of the stage. I walked to the podium slowly, giving Ella time to process what was happening. I saw her in the crowd. Saw her face go white. Saw her hand fly to her mouth. Saw the shock, the confusion, the dawning realization. I reached the microphone and looked out at the hundreds of faces. And I began to speak. Good evening. My name is Natasha Martinez. I'm 68 years old. I've worked in textile factories for 54 years. I've also cleaned office buildings, hemmed dresses, altered suits, and done every kind of sewing work you can imagine. I held up my hands. These are my hands. They're rough. They're calloused. They're stained from decades of work. They've bled from my craft. They've cramped from overuse. They've aged before their time. The room was absolutely silent. A year ago, my daughter stood on a stage at her university graduation and told 800 people that she'd always wanted hands softer than mine. The crowd laughed. They thought it was funny. Relatable. Clever. I saw Ella trying to disappear into the crowd, but people were noticing, looking at her. And maybe it was funny. Maybe it is embarrassing to have a mother with rough hands. Maybe it is something to escape from. But let me tell you what these hands built. My voice was steady, but underneath it was all the pain, all the anger, all the years of silent sacrifice. These hands raised my daughter alone after her father died. These hands worked 16-hour days so she could have school supplies and clothes and food. These hands stayed up late sewing alterations so she could go on field trips. These hands bled to buy her a laptop for college applications. These hands sacrificed comfort, health, and beauty so she could have opportunities one never did. I paused. And these hands are also the hands that inherited this factory from my aunt. These rough, embarrassing hands now fund scholarships for daughters of women who work with their hands. These calloused hands are building futures. The audience started to applaud, softly at first, then building. So yes, my daughter got what she wanted. She got soft hands. But let me tell you something about soft hands. They're a privilege that someone else's rough hands paid for. The applause grew louder. Never be ashamed of the hands that raised you. Never mock the work that gave you opportunities. Never forget that someone's rough hands might be the reason you get to have soft ones. The entire room stood. The applause was overwhelming. I saw Ella in the crowd, tears streaming down her face, mouthing, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I stepped away from the podium, exhausted and emptied out, and made my way off the stage. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. People came up to thank me, to shake my hand, to tell me their stories. But I was watching Ella. She stood at the edge of the room for a long time, just standing there, crying quietly. Finally, as people started to leave, she walked toward me. We stood facing each other. My daughter and I. The woman with rough hands and the woman who'd wanted soft ones. "Mom," she whispered. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. I didn't understand, she continued, the words tumbling out. I didn't understand what your hands meant. I was so focused on escaping poverty that I forgot to honor what got me out of it. I was so busy building my new identity that I erased you from my story. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She reached for my hands, and this time I let her take them. Your hands are beautiful, she said, crying harder. They're the most beautiful hands in the world because they built everything for me and I was too selfish and stupid to see it. I felt my own tears starting. Ella, I said quietly, I didn't do this to punish you. I did this to teach you. There's a difference between escaping poverty and escaping the people who protected you from it. I know. I know that now. We stood there in that beautiful venue, surrounded by the last lingering guests, and we cried together. Later, much later, after everyone had left and it was just us sitting on the steps outside the Performing Arts Center, Ella asked, "What happens now?" I thought about it. Now, I said, you have a choice. You can go back to New York and keep building E. Martinez's life. Or you can come work with me at the foundation, using your PR skills to tell the stories of women whose hands built futures. Either way, I love you. But only one of those choices involves remembering where you came from. She didn't hesitate. I want to work with you, she said. I want to tell these stories. I want to honor the hands that built me. And so she did. Ella moved back from New York. Not back to our old apartment, she got her own place nearby, but back to this life, back to this reality, back to the truth of where she came from. She joined the Stitch of Hope Foundation as the Director of Communications. And let me tell you, watching her work these past months has been something I never expected to witness. She tells the stories of women like me. Women whose hands tell histories of sacrifice. She interviews mothers who work in laundromats, factories, cleaning services, restaurant kitchens. She photographs their hands, really photographs them, close-up shots that show every callus, every scar, every line. And she writes their stories with a reverence that brings me to tears every time I read them. Last month, she published a piece about me. She titled it "The Hands That Built Me." In it, she detailed everything, the graduation speech, the laughter, her shame, her journey back to understanding. She didn't hide from her mistakes. She owned them publicly, the same way she'd mocked me publicly. The article went viral. Millions of people read it. Thousands commented with their own stories about parents they'd taken for granted, sacrifices they'd overlooked, shame they'd felt about their humble beginnings. And Ella read every single comment. She responded to dozens of them. She created a whole social media campaign called #HandsThatBuiltMe where people share photos and stories of their parents' working hands. It's become bigger than either of us ever imagined. But here's what I want you to understand. Here's the real lesson in all of this. I didn't do what I did for recognition. I didn't build this foundation to punish my daughter or prove a point. I did it because these hands, these rough, calloused, stained hands that someone once used as a punchline, these hands know how to build. They built Ella's childhood when there was no money and no help and no easy path forward. They built a life out of fabric scraps and overtime shifts and sheer determination. And when fortune finally came to them, they didn't stop building. They just built something bigger. The Stitch of Hope Foundation now operates in 4 states. We've provided full scholarships to 83 young women. We've employed 217 people at fair wages with good benefits. We've restored 3 failing textile factories and turned them into places of dignity and opportunity. And every single one of those scholarships, every job, every opportunity exists because rough hands knew their worth. I think about that graduation day often. I think about sitting in that auditorium, hiding my hands under my shawl, feeling the sting of public humiliation. I think about the laughter that rippled through the crowd. I think about the moment I decided not to react, not to defend myself, not to demand immediate recognition. That moment of restraint changed everything. Because if I'd lashed out, if I'd demanded an apology, if I'd tried to force Ella to see what she wasn't ready to see, I would have pushed her further away. She would have become defensive. She would have doubled down on her narrative that she'd succeeded despite me rather than because of me. But silence, patient, dignified silence, gave time room to do its work. Time brought her a job loss that showed her how quickly success can vanish. Time brought her financial struggle that reminded her what it feels like to not know how you'll pay rent. Time brought her face to face with the reality that soft hands alone don't build security, character does, resilience does, values do. And time brought her to that gala where she finally understood what rough hands can create. You know what Ella told me last week? We were sitting in my apartment, the same small apartment I've lived in for almost 4 decades, the one I still haven't moved out of despite now having the money to live anywhere, and she was looking through old photo albums. She found a picture of herself at 5 years old, right after Carlos died. In the photo, she's sitting on my lap, and my hands are wrapped around her, holding her secure. You can see the calluses even in the old photograph. You can see how rough they already were. I remember feeling so safe in your arms, she said quietly, touching the photo. I remember your hands always smelled like fabric and sometimes like that lavender lotion you used to try to soften them. I remember falling asleep while you were sewing and you'd carry me to bed with those same hands. They were gentle, Mom. Even with all the roughness, they were so gentle. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. How did I forget that? How did I forget what it felt like to be held by hands that worked themselves raw for me? I didn't have an answer. Maybe there is no answer. Maybe it's just part of growing up, that temporary blindness that happens when we're so focused on becoming ourselves that we forget the people who made that becoming possible. But the important part is that she remembered. She came back to the truth. Last month, on what would have been Carlos's 71st birthday, Ella and I went to his grave together. We hadn't been there together in years, she'd always been too busy, or too far away, or too uncomfortable with the reminder of where we'd come from. We stood at his grave, looking at that same simple wooden cross that had marked his resting place for 43 years. Dad, Ella said out loud, speaking to him for the first time since she was a child, I'm sorry I forgot you. I'm sorry I forgot what you and Mom sacrificed. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that the greatest privilege of my life wasn't escaping poverty, it was being raised by people who worked themselves to death to give me a chance to escape it. I put my arm around her shoulders, and we cried together. Then Ella did something I'll never forget. She took off her watch, an expensive designer watch she'd bought during her New York days when she was trying to look successful, and she laid it on Carlos's grave. I don't need this, she said. I don't need to wear symbols of soft-handed success. I'd rather honor the hands that actually built something real. We left the watch there. I don't know if it's still there or if someone took it. It doesn't matter. What mattered was the gesture, the understanding, the growth. These days, Ella wears a silver thimble on a chain around her neck. The same thimble I gave her before she left for New York, the one she'd tucked away in her purse without understanding its significance. She wears it every day now. She tells people it reminds her of her mother's hands, of legacy, of the real meaning of success. And when people ask her about her background, she doesn't say Riverside area anymore. She says, I grew up in a working-class neighborhood with a single mother who worked in a textile factory. Everything I am exists because of her rough hands. She says it with pride now. Real pride. But here's what I need you to understand, whoever you are watching this, wherever you are in the world, this story isn't really about me and Ella. This story is about every person who has ever worked with their hands, broken their back, sacrificed their comfort, bled for their craft, and done it all so someone else could have a better life. This story is about the mothers who clean houses so their daughters can go to medical school. This story is about fathers who work construction in dangerous conditions so their sons can have safe office jobs. This story is about the grandparents who take on extra shifts so their grandchildren can have new shoes for school. This story is about every rough hand that has ever been hidden, mocked, dismissed, or forgotten. And I want to say this directly to anyone who has ever felt ashamed of where they came from, ashamed of the people who raised them, ashamed of the visible evidence of working-class struggle. Your shame is misplaced. There is no shame in honest work. There is no shame in hands that show the marks of sacrifice. There is no shame in parents who smell like their workplace, who wear the same clothes repeatedly, who can't afford the things other parents can afford. The shame belongs to a society that teaches us to value appearance over substance, that tells us soft hands are better than rough ones, that makes us believe comfort is superior to character. My hands are rough. They will always be rough. Even now, with money in the bank and no financial pressure to work, I still go to the factory sometimes. Not because I need to, but because these hands know how to create, and creating is what gives them purpose. I'm not ashamed anymore. Not of the calluses, not of the scars, not of the way my hands look compared to hands that have never known hard labor. These hands built a human being from grief and poverty. They built hope from fabric scraps. They built a legacy from thread and determination. They built a foundation that will outlive me and help hundreds, maybe thousands, of families. These hands are beautiful. Finally, after 68 years, I believe that. And Ella believes it too. Last week, we were at the factory together, working on expanding the scholarship program to include vocational training for young women who want to work in trades, welding, plumbing, electrical work, carpentry. Ella was taking photographs for the campaign, and she asked if she could photograph my hands. I want to use them in the promotional materials, she said. I want people to see what real working hands look like. I want them to see what built all of this. I held out my hands, and she photographed them. Close-up shots that showed every detail, the calluses on my palms, the scars on my fingers, the dry skin, the prominent veins, the age spots, all of it. When she showed me the photos later, I barely recognized them. She'd captured them in a way that made them look strong, capable, beautiful. She'd captured them the way she finally sees them. These hands, she said, showing me her favorite shot, built everything that matters in my life. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. The campaign launches next month. My hands will be on billboards, in magazines, all over social media. Rough hands that refuse to be hidden, representing a foundation that celebrates the work that society often makes invisible. It's poetic, isn't it? That the same hands that were once used as a punchline for laughter will now be used as a symbol of honor. I think Carlos would love that. I imagine him sometimes, watching from wherever the dead watch from, laughing his warm, wonderful laugh and saying, "Natasha, mi amor, you always did know how to have the last word." Before we go, before I finish this story, I want to say something to the young people who might be watching this. The ones who are in college or starting their careers, the ones who are building new identities and new lives, the ones who are maybe, right now, feeling uncomfortable about where they came from. Listen to me. Your parents' rough hands, their working-class jobs, their humble homes, their simple lives, these are not things to escape from. They are things to honor. They are the foundation you're building on. You cannot build a solid life on a foundation you're ashamed of. I'm not saying you have to live the same life your parents lived. That's not the point. The point of sacrifice is to give the next generation better opportunities. But better opportunities don't mean forgetting where those opportunities came from. You can have soft hands and still honor rough ones. You can have success and still remember struggle. You can build a new identity without erasing the people who made that building possible. And to the parents who are watching this, the ones with rough hands and tired bodies and bank accounts that never seem to have enough, I see you. I honor you. Your work matters. your sacrifice matters. Even when it feels invisible, even when it feels thankless, even when your own children seem to forget or minimize what you've done, it matters. Keep building. Keep sacrificing. Keep showing up. Because one day, if you're lucky, your children will finally understand. They'll come back to the truth. They'll see what your hands built. And if they don't? If they never come back to understanding? You still did the right thing. You still built something meaningful. You still loved everything you had. That has to be enough. For me, I got lucky. I got my daughter back. I got to see her transformation, got to witness her journey from shame to pride, got to work alongside her building something that honors the very thing she once mocked. Not everyone gets that. I know that. I'm grateful for it every single day. Ella and I have dinner together every Sunday now. Sometimes at my apartment, sometimes at hers. We cook together, she's learning my recipes, the ones Carlos loved, the ones I made on a budget for years. She writes them down carefully in a notebook, preserving them for whatever future she builds. Last Sunday, she was chopping vegetables for sofrito, and she cut her finger. Nothing serious, just a small cut from the knife slipping. She winced and went to get a Band-Aid. When she came back, she looked at her finger and said, "My first cooking scar. Maybe eventually my hands will tell stories too." I smiled. Every hand tells a story, Mija. The question is whether you're brave enough to let people read it. She held up her hand with the Band-Aid, examining it like it was something precious. "I'm ready," she said. "I'm ready for my hands to tell the truth." And that, more than anything, more than the money, more than the foundation, more than the public recognition, that is the real inheritance I gave my daughter. Not soft hands. Not an escape from rough beginnings. But the courage to let her hands, whatever they become, tell an honest story. That's what these hands built, in the end. Not just a childhood, not just a career, not just a foundation. But a legacy of honesty. A legacy that says, this is where I came from, this is what it cost, this is what it built, and I'm not ashamed. My name is Natasha Martinez. I'm 68 years old. My hands are rough and calloused and scarred and stained. And I would not change a single mark on them, because every mark tells the story of love made visible through work. That day at graduation, when 800 people laughed at my hands, I felt broken. Betrayed. Diminished. But these hands knew something I had temporarily forgotten: you cannot diminish what is essential. You cannot mock what is meaningful. You cannot laugh away the truth of sacrifice. Those 800 people laughed at my hands because they didn't understand them. They saw roughness and assumed weakness. They saw calluses and assumed something to be pitted or avoided. They didn't see strength. They didn't see devotion. They didn't see 43 years of love made tangible through endless labor. But now, thousands of people see exactly that. They see these hands in our campaign materials, and they understand what working hands mean. They see the photographs Ella takes and they recognize their own parents' hands, their own grandparents' hands, their own hands. They see, finally, what should have been visible all along, that rough hands are not a punchline. They're a testament. So yes, I'm angry. I'm still angry about that day, about that moment, about the casual cruelty of being reduced to a joke. That anger lives in my bones now, a permanent resident that I've made peace with. But I'm also grateful. Because that moment of public humiliation became the catalyst for everything that followed. It became the moment I stopped trying to make myself small enough to fit into my daughter's new narrative. It became the moment I decided my hands deserved to build something visible, something undeniable, something that would force the world to see what working hands can create. My pain became purposeful. My anger became action. My humiliation became the foundation of a legacy that will outlive everyone who laughed that day. And that, my friends, is the real redemption. Not revenge. Not punishment. Not forcing an apology. But building something so beautiful, so meaningful, so undeniably important that the laughter stops on its own, replaced by respect. These hands, these rough hands, these calloused hands that someone once wished they didn't have to inherit, these hands built futures. Plural. Not just Ella's future, but the futures of 83 young women and counting. Not just one life transformed, but hundreds of lives touched. That's what rough hands can do when they refuse to be hidden. That's the story I needed to tell you. That's the truth I needed to speak into existence. That's the legacy these hands are leaving behind. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the hands that built your life, if it made you reconsider who deserves honor and respect in this world, then share it and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this. Tell someone. Let this message reach the people who need to hear it. And tell me, wherever you are in the world, wherever you're watching this from, tell me your story. Tell me about the hands that built you. Tell me about the sacrifices you've witnessed or the sacrifices you've made. Because these stories matter. These hands matter. This work matters. My name is Natasha Martinez. I'm 68 years old. My hands built something worth remembering. And I'm not done building yet.